The Parley is a debate event that champions open-mindedness, kindness and respectful dialogue when exploring contradictory ideas. Museum of Sticks and Stones would like to acknowledge and extend our deep respect to the traditional custodians of the land on which we work and live. This episode is recorded in Meanjin, the land of the Turrbal and Yagara people. We acknowledge their connection to land, sea and community and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging.
This episode features interviews from two debaters from our live Parley events. We'll hear their perspectives and reflections on their experiences of being part of a public debate. Join us first for reflections from our current host and previous debater, Ashwin Segkar, as he reflects on the first Parley, Is the Woke Internet a Better Internet? Welcome, Ashwin.
Thanks, Trisha.
This is a bit of a role reversal. Yeah, you interviewed me a little while ago and now I'm interviewing you.
It takes me back to childhood, musical chairs. It's fun.
It is a little bit. We have definitely made sure to swap glasses.
Yeah.
So it's all, safe, COVID safe. Not that I guess people are concerned as much about COVID. But anyway, I'm really excited to interview you because you've had many perspectives on the Parley. You're now our host, which we're very thankful for. And you've also been a debater on our very first Parley that we held, which was, Is a Woke Internet a Better Internet? Before we dive into that experience, tell me, what's your experience now moving between the two roles of, Parley host and Parley debater?
I actually found it easier to be an MC because, because when you're a debater, you have to take a point of view and it's nice to see both sides, but the debater almost has to railroad themselves into one angle just for entertainment and for the concept to work, to have a bit of adversarialness. So the MC, there's no pressure on you. You're just hosting it, making sure everyone has a good time. So, yeah, in some ways that's an easier job. Yeah.
I think Will was very grateful that you stepped into that role and you did it with such flair. So, we were really thankful that you took on the challenge of being Parley, the Prince of the Parley, I think is what we called you.
Yeah, I like the fact that you guys gave me a gong. I've never gonged before, so that was a nice change in my life.
I feel like you really lent into that too.
Yeah.
We'll have that for next time. That's
just a little gong, so it's a good baby starter gong.
Yeah.
I don't like my L plates of gonging.
Yeah, L plates will progress you to P plates. Yeah. And then when you're on your open gong license, we'll just get you like a huge one that you can...
Just like a monastery-sized gong. Yeah.
That sounds good.
I'm ready.
So, as I mentioned, your first Parley, you were part of the first Parley and you were debating, Is a Woke Internet a Better Internet? And you were debating against that.
Yeah.
What was your own personal perspective, coming in to discuss a topic that is already quite divisive in a public domain? Walk me through where you were at.
I forgot that it was divisive, and then I posted about the fact that I was doing it.
Yeah.
And someone ripped into me saying, "Oh, how dare you attack queer and people of colour." It's a white guy telling me I'm attacking people of colour.
Okay.
And I was like, please tell me about their experience, guy.
Yeah.
But because he just didn't want the subject to be debated. So I think that's an issue out there. People just don't want it to be discussed, debated at all. The issue is settled, leave it alone. And so he was jumping into bat for that. So and then he unfriended me. Is it defriend or unfriend?
I think it's unfriend, but I like defriend. It kind of sounds like...
More scientific.
More scientific and also just kind of like, I don't know, more tough. Like defriended.
Defriended. Sounds more final.
Yes, final.
Yeah, so it was a final defriending. And so that's when I noticed that it is a contentious issue. And my own thoughts about, I guess I lean slightly more towards the position I took on the day, which is that we don't need a woke internet. I think because fundamentally I think of the internet as a neutral place, just like we don't need a Labor parliament or a Liberal parliament. We just need a parliament and let Labor and Liberal fight it out inside the building. So I think of the internet as the building fundamentally. Of course, there are caveats to that. So that's why I was happy to take the side that I did.
I love that. I mean, I remember, I think it was Nataya who was on the opposing team who mentioned the rooms concept. Like the internet is a space with many rooms and you can enter different aspects of the internet and hear these different perspectives. And what you've just said I think is very relevant. You want spaces where people can present their ideas without necessarily having to come in with already a point of view, like a side, like a more open, neutral space.
Yeah, and that's how I enjoy the internet today. Like listen to the Majority Report, who are a left-wing political channel. Then I'll go hear what the Daily Wire, Ben Shapiro, and I just want to hear the right and the left to see what everyone says. They all hate each other.
They do.
They all mock each other. But it's nice to see the mockery going both ways, so you can at least figure out where both sides are coming from.
Yes, for sure. I recall, and I'm trying to remember distinctly, you said that the internet should be a space where the best ideas can essentially duke it out.
Yeah.
I love that framework. Do you feel like that's how you engage with the internet?
I think that's why I watch both sides, to get them to duke it out and to see if I can find out what I think as well from here. And it's hard to know because life is so complex, and so you probably agree with a bit of both sides or the middle on an issue. So it's a cliche, the contest of ideas, but I think fundamentally that's what we do on the internet, just let ideas compete. But that does mean sometimes language is rough and it's coarse and it can be hurtful. So yeah, it's a complex issue, but fundamentally I think let it be a place where people can duke things out intellectually.
There are a few threads I want to pull on there. Just in terms of your own internet or online experience, in order to have that balance, do you find that you're constantly having to curate that? Like, I think it's very easy for your digital spaces to become an echo chamber of just seeing things that you agree with. Most likely your friends agree with what you have to think. So how do you actually maintain that balance of seeing things that are more left or right-leaning or just opposing sides?
I think just subscribe to channels on both sides, at least on YouTube. Then you can follow their content. I don't know if Facebook has that option, really, of subscribing.
Yeah.
But yeah, YouTube allows you to do that. And yeah, Facebook's different though. This is why I don't particularly like the algorithm, because the algorithm assumes we want to see more of the same and that we don't want to be surprised. I think the algorithm maybe doesn't know about the delight of being surprised, which humans quite enjoy. So yeah, sometimes it gets boring being fed what you've just looked at and you want to see something new. And like just this morning, I started looking up Brazilian music, the history of Brazilian music. And the algorithm would never have suggested that to me.
Most likely not.
Because I never looked it up before. But then I was fascinated hearing the story of how this music combined the slave African rhythms with the Portuguese guitar playing, and there was no indigenous input because the Portuguese had wiped everyone out completely. And then they were talking about Tropicalia, which was like the Woodstock Brazilian music so this stuff I would never have known about because I deliberately made myself look at something I hadn't seen before. So I think the algorithm prevents you from doing that. So you have to deliberately make yourself look at things you haven't seen before if you can force yourself to do that.
Wow, I love that story. As a side note, I actually learned similar history about Brazilian music because I did Latin dancing classes.
Yeah, right,
and thankfully, that was something that they started with, so I very much so resonate with that experience.
What's your favourite Brazilian dance style?
Well, it would be more, I guess, Latin dance style, which is bachata.
Okay, right.
So anyway, I really appreciated, that surprising aspect that they started with the origin story of a music style that I had no clue about. So that was quite refreshing. Do you feel like in your quest or your search for surprising content, you often come across things that are like shocking in the sense that it's a bit extreme, or how do you manage those experiences if you have them? Yeah,
sometimes you do. I've never nothing so extreme that I couldn't cope with it. I think like YouTube would take down really extreme content. Unless you're on the darkest corners of the internet, there's some kind of filtering. But sometimes you hear unpleasant thoughts. And I know the world is heading towards a lot of very strident debates about immigration at the moment. So you're going to hear some unpleasant thoughts if you look at right-wing channels about the topic of immigration, from the UK, for instance. So sometimes I'll hear people say things, like, that's quite unpleasant to hear. That's kind of like an attack on the community that I come from. And so you do hear things that are difficult, but not so difficult that you can't handle them and counteract them. So I think that's the thing. Be able to counteract the things you don't disagree with, have some arguments in your own mind, and maybe that makes it easier. Yeah,
I think that was our intention in designing the Parley, to create a platform where people could hear, I guess, more unpleasant or perspectives that they didn't necessarily agree with, but also in a format that didn't just devolve into hate and harm.
Yeah.
So reflecting on your debater experience, Do you feel like we achieved that for you? This was a brand new concept. You were the first. You're our guinea pigs for the Parley.
Yes, that's right.
So thank you. But do you feel like the format enables you to share perspectives? I recall you also sharing an anecdote around a milkshake that was.
Yeah.
Could you tell us about that?
That was a story when I was in England. I was 6 years old. We were living in England at the time. And we were driving through a park, mum and dad in the front, me and my brother in the back, and a group of skinheads were standing in the park, and they threw a strawberry milkshake over the front seat of the car. And just later on reflecting on it, I thought, what kind of skinheads carry around strawberry milkshake? It just
Very cool.
didn't feel very romper stomper.
Yeah.
But at the time, it was just, that's quite an upsetting incident. So I've had personal experience of it. But the debate itself did allow people to speak respectfully, short time to speak. Everyone was polite. We disagreed, but it was politely done. And I think Will was emceeing that evening, and he set the tone for it. And I think the MC's important to setting the tone. It's a conversation leadership role. You set the tone for the evening, and you did a great job. Yeah.
Do you feel like having it demonstrated by Will helped with your MC position coming in?
Well, let me know what the concept was of the show.
That helps.
Yeah, so it did.
Awesome. Okay. And I guess reflecting back, is there anything you wish you had said? Like, you just mentioned that there was a very tight format. You had 10 minutes, 5 minutes, sorry.
5 minutes,
5 minutes each to express your perspective on, is a woke internet a better internet? Is there anything you were itching to say or you wish that you had more time to expand on?
I think I got most of the points across that I wanted. Just reflecting now on it, though. Yeah, I'm just wondering. I talked about the fact that I want the internet to be neutral, and also that I don't want any one group to have power, because you can't trust a group with power. It needs to be distributed as evenly as possible. So I think those are the main points. And then just maybe one that I didn't get into was just the unruliness of the mob. So mob justice is dangerous to rely on. And so, we've got to be careful with allowing mob justice to rule, even in a de facto way, if it's just about who can speak and yell the loudest and bully the most, controlling justice. I think it can be dangerous. So, just something we have to be careful with.
So how do you think we can achieve then a neutral space that then also allows or curtails dominance by one particular group? That's a very difficult balance to strike.
Yes.
Do you have any thoughts?
I guess it's just an ecosystem, is that you're going to have left-wing platforms and right-wing platforms, and sometimes people on the right build their own platforms. Elon Musk just bought Twitter and wanted to make it more open and free speech. So I guess just a variety of platforms probably helps, where people can go if they're not happy with the one they're on. And people don't need to get mad at people on the other platform. That's how they are. You can debate them. But there's that old Stoic. I've been reading it after Brazilian dancing. I looked up Stoicism.
You have great breadth of
interest.
Just
go down a rabbit hole.
I'm about this. You should send me some.
And the Stoics were saying you just have to focus on what you can control in life, and there's things that you can't control in your life, and don't get so upset about them because you have no power over them. Just put your attention on what you can control. And I think sometimes that's a good lesson for life, for debating as well. Just keep your passion for things that are really significant in your life. And then the other stuff, the conversations, the disagreements, someone's viewpoint, you don't know how they got to that viewpoint. You don't have to get personally angry at them. You just have a conversation with them. How did you arrive at that point of view? See if you can summarize what their point of view is and how they got there, rather than just attacking them because you're angry because they've offended your being. So I think, it's just treading carefully. Yeah.
It sounds like you have a very healthy approach to managing, I guess, your own well-being when engaging with digital spaces. Even just referencing like Stoicism, that ability to, I guess, detach it, to put it in layman's terms. Yeah. What other things do you think you employ, maybe not even just online, like when you're faced with a challenging conversation or a heated, exchange? How do you manage that for yourself?
Deep breathing and similar to Stoicism, maybe further east, is that Buddhists tend to idea of witnessing yourself, like you're almost the witness of the person having the debate, you're the witness of the conversation. So you're much bigger than just the argument in your head, rather than I am the argument, it's coming out of me. I'm the witness of this person arguing. Another way of stepping back. That's what I saw as the difference. Like Stoicism uses beliefs to counter negative beliefs. So it's belief on belief. So you can get rid of bad beliefs with good beliefs. Buddhism tries to snap you out of the illusion that there's a separate self in the first place that's angry, that's upset, that's a bubble of emotions. And it's just, no, you'll just watch that guy, watch that person. And it's sort of stepping back from yourself. So they're a bit different in the way they do it. So maybe combine the two.
I love that.
Stoicism or Buddha. But I can't. They sound too similar.
We could start something.
Yeah.
That deserves to be a whole separate,
I think
following.
So. They're quite useful philosophies of life. So yeah, see if you can combine the two.
I agree. I have, this is a rabbit hole, but bear with me. I have definitely gone down the Stoic route and tried to understand more philosophy. There was a bit of a philosophy club that I was a part of. And it's just interesting that, you mentioned, Stoicism, and I think in other episodes we've talked about the role of religion and things like that. It seems like, from my perspective, a lot of humanity is missing those, I guess, value-based touch points to either emotionally regulate or think about different perspectives. What do you think about that? Is that something you think people need more of in their lives? Yeah,
but it's hard to bring back religion if you don't believe in it, but definitely philosophy or reflection, self-reflection sounds important.
Yeah.
So you can see where you're coming from. I think otherwise you just pursue pleasure and avoid pain, and that becomes the point of your life.
Yeah, but hedonistic.
You become a hedonist. So, it's good to bring back something bigger than that.
For sure. Going back to the debate that we held, I think it was almost a year ago now, you've articulated that you feel like you got everything across that you wanted to debate for your team. Were there any points from the opposing side where you were like, maybe that's changed my perspective or challenged, what I thought? Did you feel like you had any perspective shifts or learn anything new about wokeness that you didn't expect? Yeah,
I think in general, the idea that sometimes really hostile, abusive speech is unnecessary. Like, we don't necessarily need to defend that if it's just gratuitous attack on someone. It's not necessary. So I understand why you'd want to restrict that, even not legally, just culturally, socially, have a taboo against behaving that way. That makes sense. I think free speech is absolute. But so that was the point of, even when I went into the debate, I didn't really fully believe in my side or the other side. But we had to take a side. Yeah. So I think, it's somewhere in the middle.
And just on that, do you feel then that the structure was something that enabled or facilitated good conversation, considering, we made you pick a side?
Yeah.
There was no middle ground for the Parley, unfortunately.
I think that's necessary for the presentation of the ideas. But then afterwards there's an open conversation where you can open it up and loosen up your stance a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I think that the panel discussion afterwards was actually quite useful for that. I remember when we were designing the Parley, it was an afterthought that would have the panel discussion. And for all intents and purposes, I think it actually garnered the most fruitful conversation because you weren't, stuck to any one particular side.
Yeah, it did do that, but you need the debate first. Like, people want you to fight first, and then they want you to hug and make up afterwards.
Yeah, people want the entertainment. They do.
You can't hug first and then fight later.
No
it's
one's
weird.
hanging around for that. Yeah, okay. So I guess just finally, we've now had 2 Parleys. You've been a debater, you've been an MC. What advice would you give to anyone listening on who might be interested in either taking part in the Parley or, even facilitating more challenging conversations with their network?
Okay, so if you want to take part in the Parley, come up with the 2 or 3 clear points for your 5 minutes.
Okay.
And make sure you talk to the audience, not at them. Just a public speaking tip in general.
Yeah.
Talk to people, not at them. Eye contact, pause, acknowledge things in the crowd, or, just connect with people. I think it makes that helps. And then in more generally with your friends, sometimes it's hard. Your friends might not be interested in political or social conversations, so you don't need to force it on people. And maybe bring them along to a debate of some kind, and then that afterwards you might be able to have conversations about this, or later on in your friendship you might be able to have conversations about this. So take them along to something, some kind of talk fest.
Love that. Well, Ashwin, thank you so much for joining me on this role reversal interview. It's been a pleasure speaking to you, and thank you for your time.
Cool. Thanks, Trisha.
Thanks. Next up, you'll hear from Dan Axelson as he recounts his time as a part of Parley number 2, where he debated, should cancel culture be cancelled?
Dan, you're part of the winning team on the debate on should cancel culture be cancelled, and you thought it shouldn't be cancelled. What was the main point that you wanted to make that day?
Yeah, no, thank you. Look, I think that personally, I just didn't want to screw up and be canceled myself. As the running joke was, I think for most people, that was obviously a concern that we had. But, as a group, as we met and kind of decided what approach were we going to take, we looked at it from kind of 3 parts. One was that biologically cancel culture can't be canceled. Now, obviously, it's not very good to go into a debate and just kind of ignore the actual topic at hand. So we did accept that, okay, let's think of as though it could be, but why is it a part of who we are biologically? So we talked about that and the fact that, we as a group often look to call out behavior that is actually incongruent with societal norms, and also that which is kind of works against us as a whole. Secondly, we talked about the fact that the actual act of canceling helps to give marginalized people a voice. And so this is something that as a platform, it's able to then call out behavior that systematically could be oppressive, but is something that we know not to be good, again, for the greater group. You
must have been anticipating some pushback from the other side, though. Do you know what kind of arguments you were expecting to come your way in defense of cancel culture, in saying cancel culture should be gotten rid of?
Yeah, well, no, I do think that I think one thing, and I hope that the video portrays it as well as it played out in my head, but in my mind, I had these responses to what I thought their defense would be. And so things like, again, the Kafkaesque, people not expecting or not knowing where the cancellation came from. So in the notion of like the trial, people just being canceled without any notice or any understanding of why it is that they were canceled, I thought was one thing. So this notion of lawlessness, also the kind of the anonymity associated with cancel culture, I think, was one thing. People kind of, again, keyboard warriors, or just these kind of masses in social media and stuff attacking people and kind of looking to get them canceled for some, again, ulterior motive or something which isn't known. So very deceptive, kind of dark mirror-esque. So this is kind of what we're expecting, and I think it did actually play out in the con side.
Just listening to those arguments, did you walk away with any different point of view from hearing the other side?
Oh, look, I think that, to be honest, coming into it, like, I'm pretty even keel. And I think that in choosing a side, I kind of put it forward to the response of when I was asked to do it, of happy to do it, happy to be on either side.
Yeah.
I did have a preference, and the preference is the side that I was on,
yes,
because I think that ultimately it is kind of what I believe. But walking away, I think if anything, what I really appreciated was the opportunity to have a public debate. It was actually the discourse itself. So it's kind of like, the game was the winner on the day. But I very much appreciated, I guess, the other team's perspective. Admittedly, in the moment of the debate, I didn't really have the chance to take it all in. I was too busy because, I had my form. It's actually the act of debating and being a part of it is something that I got a lot out of because I had never done it before. And so the notion of preparing for it and trying to understand what the argument may be, having a bit of a straw man to then fill in the blanks with some of the details of what they said, and then also updating from our side as well, kind of became quite a focus. So that actual act of debating is something that kind of overtook my ability to take it in. But I really was trying to listen for alignment and understanding.
Yeah, that's interesting. A debate does force you to take a side, so you can miss some of the nuance that you really would express in a proper conversation about it. But it's interesting you bring up the idea of just debating, and public speech has an important role. Can you tell us about what you think the value is of being able to speak your mind, especially as someone who's doing it for the first time? How good was it for you to get your thoughts out in front of an audience of a couple of hundred people?
Oh, look, I public speaking is not something that, I've shied away from necessarily, but at the same time, I don't think I've ever put forward a contentious or potentially like a viewpoint that I knew would actually be counter to somebody in the room.
Yes.
I've always probably sought to be agreeable. And so the whole notion of taking a position was a bit challenging. But it was very, again, such a safe place, and I think that the way that the conversation was set up and that we were allowed to participate, I mean, it was both sides were very not only open to what the other had to say, but curious, So I think that, the part of public discourse and the actual opportunity to do it was great. And the audience as well, people that I know who came along and just witnessed it, and people who had different viewpoints coming into it or maybe weren't certain how they felt about it, to hear both sides and for them both to be well articulated and rounded and considerate. I think people got a lot out of that.
It's interesting. There must be a lot of people, I feel like I'm the same, generally quite agreeable. We just like to keep the peace. But when we're forced to be in a combative environment, it's probably quite therapeutic in some ways because you're not bottling it up. You're just saying something. Do you think there's a benefit for those who want to have difficult conversations to engage in this kind of behaviour, to take a stand?
Definitely. I think that the opportunity to say your piece, the preparation for it was great, because the actual notion of preparing to actually understand what I feel, how I felt, and then being able to share that. And even if we did have that opportunity, like the conversation post-debate with both sides, I thought was really interesting and really enjoyable as well, because again, it was still the respect of the structure and the debate kind of played out there as well. And I mean, it was amazing moderation as well. I think, that really helped. So thank you for that. But in all honesty, like, it was that notion of kind of, you still had point counterpoint and talking through and people reflecting on it, which was really good. So yeah, I think that was nice.
Do you think you'll continue the debate live?
I think if the opportunity presented, I definitely would. Again, I think that from thinking through these topics that you wouldn't normally engage on. Like, I'm not somebody who is either, really, really active in social media. I don't necessarily get out there as much, but I'm a passive participant from what I hear, and then I'm thinking it through. So for me to be able to be exposed to it, to consider it, formulate a viewpoint, and then to be able to articulate that was really enjoyable and beneficial as well.
Is there enough of that kind of conversation, say in your workplace or in your family life? Do you notice people don't combat perhaps as much as they should in a respectful way?
Oh, I think there's definitely a huge lack of it. And I think that when you do take it on within those environments where you find, at work, for example, the notion of psychological safety and people talking about that, do you have this? I think that the actual ability to comfortably, calmly articulate a contradicting viewpoint to someone else it's not cultivated.
No, and that's maybe comes back to having a structure to it, like a moderator and a set of rules, because otherwise the loudest, most extroverted people will dominate the conversation, right?
Yeah.
We don't get to hear from everyone.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and a lot of the kind of group bias as well come into it, and it's so sometimes it's like, I find it really interesting when you look at some groups and you have got the head of the group, the CEO, whomever it is, who kind of has a viewpoint, and if that is known, they don't even have to say anything to shut down conversation. So it isn't even that extrovert, because it's oftentimes you do find there's 2 or 3 people in a group of, say, 12 who can really take over the conversation and kind of drive focus. But I think it's really interesting sometimes how if there's an existing kind of power structure that they don't even have to say anything, people just know going into it that I'm just not going to,
That's interesting, the hidden power that exists and how debates can challenge that hidden power.
Definitely, yeah.
One of the themes that have come up during this podcast series is in counter to cancel culture is that it doesn't allow for forgiveness and second chances. Mm-hmm. Have you reflected on that idea? What do you think about it?
I have thought a lot about like the whole notion of the phenomenon of cancel culture, because I do feel like the actual act of canceling and what is happening there, it does very much align with my side's debating points in relation to it's a part of who we are, that it does give voice to some people that are often marginalized, and that it is something that there are structures in place to protect people from kind of the real negative side of it. So the whole notion of it doesn't allow for forgiveness, I don't know, I think that that's very individual. It's very much up to that person and to the wrong that they've committed, because unless it's somebody who is being canceled for something that isn't true or it has no merit at all, I think that then you have no opportunity for forgiveness, because there's nothing to apologize for or someone to apologize to. Whereas, where you do have instances of people who have been canceled for past behavior, it's a very personal process. And I don't know if we as a group would actually get any insight into what they've done. So I can't speak for any specific instance. I'm not close to anybody who has been canceled, but I can only assume that should they want to go down that path of redemption and actually looking at getting the forgiveness of the individual or the individuals that they've hurt, that it would be very much dependent upon both parties' ability to apologize and actually accept that apology. So, yeah.
If someone, it's such a nuanced issue, which is why the debate is interesting, because it makes you take a side and hear the others until you finally formulate your own. But it's an important thing. Just the conversation itself, it's almost like it's not the debate that matters as much as the act of speaking and formulating a thought and knowing what you really think, putting a label on what your thoughts are. If someone else is interested in doing this, what would be your suggestion to them, having done it for the first time? What would your advice be to them?
Well, listen, I think, like all things, you should embrace new technology and do what I did and just go and have a nice conversation with ChatGPT about saying, so
just
to be frank,
rewrite a little bit. Yeah.
Well, I did. I was like, okay, how do I, because I was really trying to think through the arguments for the counter side, and I did go on there and I thought, ask a few questions, and it did prompt me to think about a few things a little differently. Like there was one of the, I quoted a philosopher, Jacques Rancière, in the debate in talking about, and it actually came about from this story that I had found, an example from Kentucky in relation to a piece of public art down there. And this is this kind of, it was a nice story that I thought succinctly kind of articulated the many sides to cancel culture. So you've got kind of intergenerational trauma, you've got a public artist, you've got the art that was put up, in the 1930s and was offending people, and then you've got the administrators who are kind of then having this response, which some people would have thought was the pendulum swinging too far to overcorrect kind of thing. So this is a really interesting story, and off the back of that, I was then looking for some insights into the role of art in public discourse and things. But this whole notion of art is kind of a disruptor and actually challenging society and giving us these opportunities to look at the balance of power that we have and how that all plays out. But I guess, sorry, I've kind of diverted from the question, but your question being, how do people look into it? Like the actual process, I think, of just doing a bit of research and trying to understand what you're doing and engaging with those topics of like, well, what is it that we're canceling here? Is it a person's actions? Is it something, again, is it statues of old Confederate soldiers like in America? Like what is it that we're actually really offended by? How does that sit with me? It should be a question for the individual that says like, but why is this offensive? What does this mean to us in contemporary society? Do we forget all of history for the sake of kind of going forward? Where are we going? So.
And then what about the presenting style as a first-time debater? What did you focus on?
Oh, just, well, I think as a presenter, first-time debater, I very much just, obviously I wasn't very good at time management. I think the 3 minutes I had practiced a lot.
I had a gong for you guys. I might have forgotten
No, you did. And
okay.
then I think I turned to you and I said, I'm just going to keep going or something to that effect. And you were
which is very
kind.
dominant for a first-time debater.
Well, I thought I got something to say. I need to get it all out. But no, I think that, having that structure, I don't know, there was, again, in preparation for it, there was a great revisionist history podcast of Malcolm Gladwell that I listened to where he had recounted a story of debating and doing terrible, like absolutely getting just beat up in this debate because he hadn't prepped for it at all. He'd come into it and gone, I know this topic, I can talk to it, and I'm paraphrasing here, and then was there with other professional debaters and was just, made a fool. And so then he, the podcast was then him talking to a debate club in Brooklyn and talking to a few people there, and they said, okay, you need to listen, you need to understand the other counterpoint. So from a presentation style, I think, again, having something prepared, a framework or straw man, I could then fill in the blanks. Like I literally had blank pages to go, I'm just going to write a few notes, and had a few words from the team as well. So I wanted to make sure that I didn't lose the opportunity to feed back what the other team was saying, and then kind of shuffling our response into that as well. So I think that was really important. And as I said at the beginning of this conversation, I struggled to, in the moment, fully comprehend and take in and remember what they were saying. but to pick up the points and kind of go, this is the crux of their statement. To have that to feed back to them and then to counter that was really important. So
You seem to do a lot of research. You did a lot of self-reflection, which is very good. I've heard this psychologist explain that there's two types of temperament to people. People who are high in order and high in conscientiousness and openness, one of the big 5 personality traits. And people who are high in openness tend to vote to the left side of politics, progressive change, innovation, experiments. People who are in conscientiousness tend to get things done, more practical, but can be a bit more black and white. And when you mentioned that the cancel culture aligned with your order, with your values, I'm wondering, do you find yourself close to the side of order and discipline rather than the artist's openness, and just as a way of self-discovery?
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, personally, I'll start by saying I don't believe in binaries.
Yeah, as a general spectrum.
And I love it though, because this is where, I think that when I first had a realization that, okay, you don't have to have one or the other. You can be along the spectrum, and sometimes it does shift based on where we're at. And I think that the values part of it is interesting because I think I still don't know where I stand in relation to where does cancel culture sit within my personal value set. I mean, it's a very interesting. It's a very interesting thing and calls for a lot of reflection when I look at the part that, again, I think one thing about this whole debate and this discussion is that it had made me more and more aware of kind of who I am in this world as a 42-year-old white male. I am sitting in a place where I probably don't understand who I am in that realm. And I think there's a lot of considerations there. And I think that made me reflect on kind of going, well, like, I wouldn't be one to necessarily cancel. Like, I'm not involved within certain areas of influence where I would have the ability, to be able to call somebody out for behavior and say, we need to cancel this individual. So there's a lot in that, I think, and again, that cause of self-reflection. So I do think that I like because you said consciousness and
conscientious
openness.
versus open. Yeah,
I think that for me personally, I kind of go from one and that loose notion of conscientiousness and where are we, and put it and order it. So I don't know if that necessarily.
Yeah, I think it's situational.
Fits.
Sometimes you have to be the doer, and sometimes you
Yeah.
have to be the thinker.
Yeah. I think
the
often
dreamer.
the thing that I really like is to go into new environments, to be open to what it is that's happening in that place, to understand, and then to understand the rationale and kind of the drivers for it, and then from that create a notion of, okay, well, what does that mean? And so I always think of it as, like, from what I understand, of like an anthropological perspective of kind of, again, going in, looking at a habitat and environment, and then trying to make a rational understanding of why it is that way. And I took this as the same.
Did anyone come along to the debate that you know personally?
Yeah. So my wife came along.
And what did she think about you and what you said?
She thought I was a fool for even doing it. No, she was supportive in her own way, but she's like, "Why are you doing this? You're not, this is terrible. You could really expose yourself." And I thought, "Oh, I don't know about that. I hadn't really thought of it that way." No, but I did have a few other. I actually had a couple coworkers who came along, who saw it on LinkedIn and surprisingly were interested. And I thought, okay, this is it. I don't often put myself out there in these ways, and so I was surprised to have that support, which was very nice. And I think they took away again from the actual platform, the public discourse. They really enjoyed the fact that you had opposing views that were actually communicated respectfully and I guess in a controlled way. There's no anger or yelling or anything like that, or even snarky replies or anything. Like sometimes even on some of the more balanced shows, you can still see people kind of try and get underneath each other's skin.
Yes, scoring points.
Yeah.
Now, it was a very respectful debate, which I think helped a lot, and you're a key part of that. Dan, thanks for doing the debate and for sharing your thoughts on it today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Parley podcast. To register for future events, you can find the link in our show notes. You'll also be able to explore our research and hear people's stories about experiencing harm online. You can find us across all socials at sticksstones.org. The Parley Unplugged is proudly brought to you by Darla Health, your personal wellbeing partner. Darla is an Australian-born AI-powered wellbeing app designed to help you understand yourself, your emotions, and provide personalised feedback and tools to improve individual mental wellbeing. Head to hellodarla.com to learn more.